talk about the TRS-80 or the Tandy Colour Computer, but not about the machine itself. It's about the state this machine was in when I got it and how it was put right to what you actually see here and how I got it to this condition. Now, a lot of people are probably going to think retro bright, hydrogen peroxide or other chemicals to make this machine a lot brighter than it normally was. But that wouldn't have fixed the faults on this machine or the problems, because the problems on this machine were that it had a lot of nicks and dents and scuffs in the plastics itself, which, you know, if you put it through you know, a retro bright sort of scenario, it wouldn't have actually cured or fixed those issues. It probably would have made the plastics a lot brighter, but it wouldn't have actually repaired the dents, the scratches, the scuffs, etc. So what I was going to show you is how I put it right. But before we do that, I just want to talk about retro brighting as a whole. If you've seen the video I did on retro bright probably about 6 or 7 months ago now, and I decided to use the sun instead, which I got some half decent results from just by 5 or 6 hours in bright sunlight. I did say at the time that I wasn't a big fan of retro bright as a whole because it makes the plastics brittle, and let me explain a little bit more about that, because a lot of people think it's the fire retardant that they put in the plastics that turns yellow after a time, but that's not entirely the case. It doesn't help, but it's not the cause of the actual yellows or the plastics going yellow, so to speak. What it is within the makeup of plastics, they've got what's called free radicals, and what happens to those is they, over time, make the plastic more brittle and they change its colour. And it's exactly the same as if you leave a piece of plastic out in the sunlight, it will bleach. It will go, say, from red to a pink, eventually to no colour at all. And that's one way of bringing plastics back to a little bit more clear or a little bit more closer to the colour they were, but it's also damaging the plastics. And because these free radicals are in the plastics as well, it kind of makes them brittle. And they get brittle to the point where they become unusable. And introducing chemicals and UV light, it might make the plastics a little bit brighter. It might get them closer to the original colour. It never gets them exact. But what it will do is make them more brittle. And that's what I want to try and avoid as much as possible. So, because of the damage that was on this machine, and also because I'm not the biggest fan of wholesale retro brighting, it does have a place maybe for keys which have a different plastic and they're slightly heavier than the cases and slightly thicker, so they can withstand a little bit more. I'm not a big fan of retro brighting the entirety of a computer just to make it closer to the original colour. Now, a lot of the times I'd rather leave them in their slightly yellowed state, because at least the plastics are holding together. They're not being forced to become brighter and therefore becoming more brittle. There's a lot of science behind it, which really I will go into on an episode, but not this one, because this is more about how I put this computer back to its as new or as close to as new condition as possible. Just very quickly about yellowing, okay? Bromine, which is what seems to get blamed for the yellowing of plastics, but it's a misconception, because it's bromine basically would turn into bromate salt and it would dissolve in water and the plastic would not stay yellowed. Yet it doesn't happen, okay? So it's not bromine that causes it. There are free radical issues in the polymers, which is why what we call retro brighting is not very good because it does make the plastics a little bit more brittle. And as you can see from here, there's a little bit on how yellowing actually works, and it has very little to do with bromine. It's about UV light and heat, which is what actually causes it. Just to make it really clear, it ruins the mechanical strength of the plastic, making it much more brittle than fresh ABS, which is, most people do know that this is actually how it happens. The reason why RetroBright seems to work is not because of RetroBright itself, it's because of a bleaching agent. So everything you've heard about the RetroBright process is not entirely true, and obviously you can research the video yourself, and basically all it does is bleaches the plastic, which is why it also further damages the plastic. Really the only real way to stop the bleaching issue or the yellowing issue on an old computer is to try and reverse it slightly without using chemicals, or to repaint the entire case, because then it's preventing any more attack from ultraviolet light because the paint's protecting it. And also paint will also stop any more degradation of the case itself, so the polymers and all the free radicals in the polymers actually don't produce the same results as it would as an unpainted finish. And we kind of know this because if you look at a painted piece of plastic, it always tends to be in very good condition a long time after it was built. Most of it was using one of these. Okay, it just looks like a sanding sponge. Well, it is in a way. It's an ultra fine paintwork sanding sponge. It's for refinishing, and it's got two kind of coarseness to the sponge itself. It has a fine and a superfine coarse, so it's not aggressive, but it's light enough not to take the grain out of the plastics as well. And because you're just going against that top layer, what it does is it takes the discoloured plastic slightly off, very gently. It takes away that layer and leaves the original plastic colour underneath. Now, it doesn't work with all plastics, you have to realise this. It will work with bright white plastics, it will work with very thick plastics, but when you look at the Atari STs, it won't work with that at all, because the plastic on those are too thin. They're very brittle, very fragile. But it could work with more, I'd say, quality cases, such as the Dragon 32s, the BBC Micros and such, as long as you don't take the grain away. So that's what you have to watch out for. It's very, very light work. So, and the other biggest thing is you have to use a little bit of moisture on the sponge. You can't use it as a dry sanding pad, because that will cause more damage. So the best way is to strip the machine, but I didn't need to for this because I'm probably used to doing this kind of stuff. But if you're not, strip the machines away and then just start off with the case, and you add a very mild soapy water to your sponge, but not a lot, just damp, not to soak the case, and then that takes the edge off of the coarseness again on the sanding block, and it actually then allows you to get a really good finish if you take your time. It's not going to be a 5-minute job, but it's also not going to be the 4 or 5 days that it would have taken to retro-bright this properly by stripping it, cleaning it, hydrogen peroxide, either using a UV lamp or direct sunlight, which takes hours and hours and sometimes days to get a decent finish. And then you're also not worried about getting a streaky finish because you are using a uniform way of bringing back the colour and bringing back, the original plastic colour to the machine. So shall we have a quick look? Okay, so this is the original state the machine was in. The keyboard has been cleaned and that's really about it, along with a wipe over of the machine. You can see the dents and marks along the front. It's not brilliant, but it's something that we need to sort out. Same as along the edge here, it's exactly the same. There are scuffs all over this machine. And as you can see, the case itself really does need seeing to and sorting out because it is in a bit of a state. Right in the back, you've got more damage, more scuffs, more nicks, more dents. Retrobrite won't get this out, so it needed a lot more than that to really repair it. And it's not in the best condition, but the machine does work and it works fine, so it's worth trying to bring it back to life. Now this is what we're using. It's the ultra-fine sanding sponge. It's for paint work on one side and it's fine on the other, and it's mainly used for refinishing, and it's light enough to sand along the machine just like this. Don't put any pressure on it, just be very gentle with it and it'll start bringing the colour up, and also taking out some of those dents and nicks as you go. You don't have to force it. It will do it naturally if you just don't press on it too hard. Remember, the sponge has to have a little bit of moisture on it, otherwise it will dig in. Same with this mark here. You're just going to gently sand it out without trying to remove the texture on the plastic surface itself. And you see, you just take your time, very light circles, and that's how you do it all around the machine. And just take your time on this, no rush, because you will make mistakes if you rush. Now as you can see, the top bar is really badly scuffed up and it does have a few dents and nicks on it, so again, just take your time and just gently sand some of the surface off while taking out a lot of the dents and nicks and scratches with it as you go. And again, it's just don't rush. That's all it's about, is not rushing. And don't go too hard with the sanding block itself. And then the same around the back where it's really badly nicked. You can see the state of it with the dents, and again just slowly, gently bring it back out, and you just keep on gently going until you get the finish you want. Once you've done that, you've used the superfine side of it on the case, and you can just clean it off, and there's not a lot else to do with it. I mean, if you really wanted to go a little stage further, you could respray the top coat in a satin clear coat, but there's no real need to do it. And as you can see, it almost comes up like factory fresh for not a lot of effort. It's a couple of hours as against days to Retrobrite, and you're not stressing the plastic, and it actually does a lot better finish, especially when you've got dents and nicks and marks in the plastics. So this is coming up to the finished machine, and this is how it will look when you put it on your bench. And it's not that much or not far away from being a brand new looking machine, and it's quite surprising what a little bit of out of the box thinking can actually do, and you're not using chemicals, which is always a good thing. And you can still see the texture on all of the parts and all of the bits of the case. And that's your completed machine. Okay, so I hope you find that really useful. and I hope it's something that you might want to try on one of your own machines instead of using hydrogen peroxide. The end of the time I spent on this was only about hour and a half at the most, of gently taking the surface layer off without actually taking the texture off in places. And as you can see by the close-ups, it's very good, very good. There's some more cleaning jobs to do on the keyboard just in between it. I might pull the caps off and do it, but you know, it's a good job. It looks the part, it looks almost new in comparison to what it was. So I hope you enjoyed this slightly different way of doing something. So it's something that you'd have to judge for yourself, but it does work. And as I said, take your time and it will come out well if you do it. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoyed this look at a different way of doing it, and I hope you'll join me again on some of the repairs we're going to do in the future. Okay, so thanks for your time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you shortly. Thank you.